We're live.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'll call to order the City Hall Building Ad Hoc Committee. It is Tuesday, 4 o'clock, or I'm sorry, 4:06 on August 11th. With us are Councilwoman Liz Mealy, Councilman John Mackey, Mayor Derek Slaughter, Joe Pavlock, Chris Cooley from the administration, Janice Frank, our city clerk. Mr. Girardi is joining us. Welcome, Mr. Girardi. And our esteemed guest, Mr. Bruce Huffman. First item on the agenda is a presentation on the history of City Hall and its acquisition by the city of Williamsport by our guest, Bruce Huffman. Bruce, welcome. Looking forward to your presentation. If we want to, as we're listening, if we have questions, it might be easier to hold questions on anything we catch or what have you towards the end. So we'll let Bruce go through his presentation, and if there's any questions, comments, what have you that pop up, we'll save them for the end. So, Mr. Huffman, the floor is yours.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I just need to get situated here, so give me a second.
No problem.
Oops. Okay, does everyone see that? Hello?
Yes.
You're good, Bruce.
Okay, good. Okay, good afternoon, council members and other committee members. Thank you for the invitation to speak. I'm going to start with a little disclaimer here. While the information provided is largely from newspaper accounts and other primary sources believed to be reliable and factual, I do not make any claim or warranty as to the accuracy, completeness, relevance, or reliability of the information herein. I've tried to present this perspective of historical events in an independent and unbiased way, and I hope that by the end of this presentation, you will agree. So I would like to begin with a quote from the foreword in the book, America's City Halls, published in 1984. Quote, "Every American city possesses a building that serves as the center of its government and community life. These city halls, because of their pivotal role in the lives of their cities, have become revered landmarks in many places. Their contributions to the development of their communities and American architecture cannot be overlooked." Now, in order to provide a thorough historical perspective of Williamsport's current City Hall, it is necessary to give some background context by starting at the beginning. So when Michael Ross sold the first lots in his newly laid out 110-acre development in what was then Loyalsock Township on July 4th, 1796, he likely never imagined that Williamsport would eventually grow to be nearly 50 times its original size. After Williamsport was chartered as a borough on March 1st, 1805, the Burgess and Town Council likely held their meetings in either the Russell Inn or the first Lycoming County Courthouse, which was on the same site, but much smaller than the current courthouse. Williamsport government was still pretty small more than 40 years later, but as Williamsport grew rapidly in area and population during the 1850s and 1860s, it was chartered as a city on January 15th, 1866. A new form of government soon went into effect, requiring 25 elected officials. A year later, when the Newberry area and lands to the west were annexed, the number of elected officials increased to 36. Where did all these people meet on a regular basis? Without verifying firsthand accounts, it cannot be said definitely, but likely, Williamsport city government continued to meet in the second and much larger county courthouse completed in 1860. City government may have also met in large but privately held halls such as trainers or dobblers, and at one point Peter Hurdick even offered space. But it was not until 1876 when Lewis Jameson constructed a large 3-story business block at 112 West 4th Street, what is today the parking lot between the Chamber of Commerce Visitor Center building and the former First National Bank, that Williamsport city government had a meeting space specifically arranged for it on the 2nd floor. However, this was space that the city had to rent. Again and again, the push for Williamsport to have its own city hall was brought forth. It wasn't until the late 1880s, during the time when a new federal building was being constructed, that the movement gained real traction. As always, the issue mostly revolved around money and debt. But in 1892, an ordinance established a bond that the city would take out toward the building cost. Part of the rationale was that it would get the city out of having to pay heavy monthly rents for space in a building it did not own. So on July 4th, 1894, the first true Williamsport City Hall was dedicated with much pomp and fanfare. The cost of the building was under $75,000. City government would continue to be housed in this structure for the next 80 plus years, and through 2 changes to its form of government. One of those was in 1913, resulting in much smaller government, and the other in 1972, which is our current form. So in the early 1970s, shortly after this form of government went into effect, questions began to arise about the feasibility of continuing to use the structure at 454 Pine Street. Ultimately, after several years and much discussion of many possible plans and options, it was decided to abandon the site, primarily for building safety reasons. During this time, city government met at several locations, including the 3rd Lycoming County Courthouse, completed in 1971, and according to Solicitor Lubin, the city's newly constructed public services building on West 3rd Street. In 1977, during his 2nd year in office, Mayor Daniel P. Kirby proposed the idea of the city acquiring the post office building at 245 West 4th Street, which the federal government was looking to sell. With a $100,000 grant from the Williamsport Foundation, the city purchased the building on August 19, 1977. And after extensive remodeling, the building was dedicated as Williamsport's 2nd City Hall on October 18th, 1979. This is what the directory looked like that year, and you can see where the different offices of the city government were on the different floors. It's interesting that the State Auditor General's office was on the 3rd floor, and that's because the city actually had more space than it needed, and it rented out some of the 3rd floor. So the city continued to own Old City Hall until it was sold to developer Richard Lundy Jr. in 1982 for $50,000. Prior to that, however, in 1976, largely due to efforts of the Greater Lycoming County Community Arts Council, Old City Hall was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Another proposal, other than Mr. Lundy's, shows a drastic near 90% demolition of that building, only the center smaller tower remaining in this architect's rendering. So best known as the old post office, the building at 245 West 4th Street was originally designed to be the U.S. courthouse and post office with additional offices for other federal staff. Prior to and during construction, it was referred to as the public building and the government building. Later, it was called simply the federal building and then the post office. Its history goes back to at least 1881, when the idea of such a building being located in Williamsport was first proposed. And it was by Honorable Robert Jarvis Cochran Walker, who lived in Williamsport and was a US congressman. He introduced a bill on September 17th, 1881, in which he sought $125,000 to obtain a site and erect a federal building. Now, Mr. Walker was the husband of Annie Whiteman Walker, whose father, William Whiteman, had purchased nearly all of Peter Hurdick's holdings when he went bankrupt in 1878. So as congressional appropriations were enacted and ultimately reached $225,000, Williamsporter Colonel Frederick E. Embick was the first superintendent appointed during the administration of President Arthur in February of 1884. After some complaints that Embick had no building experience, Williamsport architect Eber Culver was named assistant superintendent to Embick. But soon after that, Amos Wagner was appointed to succeed both of them and replace both of them. And that was during that same presidency of President Arthur. But when President Cleveland took over, it reverted back to Embick. Now, there was much squabbling over where the public building would be located. Ross Park, the former Pine Street burying ground, was considered at one point, and building sites on prominent corners were proposed. But finally, the Wilkinson site was decided on, and condemnation proceedings began. Now, the architect, or the supervising architect, was William A. Ferret, who was considered the supervising architect of the Treasury. The Treasury at that time designed all government buildings, post office, courthouses, customs offices, and the like. So his plans called for a building that looked like this, and I'm going to read from the original 1888 description of the building. The design for the government building to be erected at Williamsport, PA, is of the English Romanesque style of architecture, with center tower and end pavilions. The building is situated at the corner of 4th and West Streets, the main entrance being on 4th Street. The general dimensions are 126 by 51 feet. The building will be faced with rough-faced ashlar, roof to be slated and to have copper, finials, dormers, etc. The first floor of fireproof construction. The entire first floor will be utilized for post office purposes, there being a large and commodious workroom and offices for money order and registry divisions, postmaster and assistant postmaster, and ample fireproof vaults. The corridors of the first and second floors to have marble tiling. The heating apparatus, water closets, fuel, and storerooms situated in basement. The entire second floor is to be used to accommodate the courts and court officials, there being offices for judges, district attorney, clerks, United States Marshal, and also a room for a law library, as well as offices for internal revenue purposes, jury, and witness rooms. On this floor is situated the district courtroom, 31 by 46 feet. On the third floor will be the circuit courtroom, 23 by 30 feet. Offices for judges, clerk, district attorney, and jury and witness rooms, and also water closets. The signal service will have ample accommodations in the tower, and a pole will be provided for the display of signals. Entrance steps, mailing platform, etc. will be of granite. The ashlar facing the building of limestone. The post office screen and entrance doors will be hardwood, and all other interior finish pine painted. The tower is 18 feet square and 91 feet in height. The post office, working room, and the two courtrooms will have wood wainscoting. So the general contract was awarded to Thomas and Driscoll of Washington, D.C. in July of 1888. and that amount was $123,000. It was to be completed in 30 months. A subcontract for the stonework was awarded to Pitkin & Son of Rochester, New York, because the stone carving was considered too complicated for local masons. Just as construction was getting started, Colonel Embick was removed as superintendent and James H. Fulmer was appointed. But then after a problem with the stonework in March of 1889, Amos Wagner was reappointed and he completed the building. Wagner appointed William Waltz, also of Williamsport, to be the foreman. Later on, George Kroll, also of Williamsport, got the plumbing contracts. So the Great Flood of 1889 did slow down things quite a bit, as you can imagine. But as soon as possible, construction work continued again. In August of 1890, the construction for approaches was let to Owen Patterson. This included the steps, curbing, and sidewalks. And in June of 1891, the post office officially moved in. Soon after the building was opened, the street that ran along the eastern side was changed from West Alley to Government Place. In 1904, Congressman and Williamsporter Elias Deemer talked about the need for more space and possibly sought an appropriation for that. In 1916, Congressman Edgar Keese, also of Williamsport, sought an appropriation for enlargement. And in 1919, an appropriation of $165,000 for an extension and remodeling seems to have been made, but it's not clear whether this was done immediately or was delayed for quite some time. It seems that it was delayed because later on then in 1930s, there was talk of enlargement. And it was at that time that the US Treasury Department had begun to use local architects. So plans by Williamsport native Arthur Reinhard were submitted and approved. Unfortunately, I don't have a photo of Mr. Reinhard. I only have his grave marker, but this would nearly double the size of the building by extending it to the south, as well as adding a second floor to the rear of the building. The contract for that expansion went to R.B. McDaniel of New Brighton, Pennsylvania in October of 1932, and it was to be completed in 360 days for a cost of $171,645. In January of 1933, because this was during the Depression and they were trying to use local workers, Jacob Koch of Du Bois Town had the contract to erect the steel skeleton. The entire work was completed just before the holidays in December of 1933. In the 1950s, more remodeling work was undertaken in 1955, with the most prominent aspect being that of an elevator to be added to the tower. Prior to that time, there was no elevator other than a work elevator that went from the basement to the first floor for the post office. This new elevator was dedicated in January of 1956. So it wasn't long after that, not even 15 years, that in 1969, plans were discussed for a new federal building site, and the US courthouse and post office was threatened because it was considered, quote, functionally obsolete. but it was saved from demolition. Essentially, Andrew Grugan and the Lycoming County Historical Society started a petition to save the building because of their unsuccessful efforts to save the previous 1860s courthouse. It was at that time that architectural historian Diana Steck-Waite submitted the forms necessary to the State Historical Registry. This was done because in May of 1971, there was a presidential directive that mandated, quote, that any federally owned property that might qualify for nomination to the National Register is not inadvertently transferred, sold, demolished, or substantially altered. So the structure was indeed added to the National Register in 1972. Unfortunately, it never received a plaque similar to this one. Shortly after his administration took office, Mayor Capelli undertook some restoration of the building, including the council chambers, which were remodeled. And around that time, the city was presented with a plaque from Preservation Williamsport in recognition of these restoration efforts. Now, I would like to leave you with the words that a young architectural historian, Diana Steck-Waite, wrote for the Statement of Significance section of the nomination form in 1971. Located at an important intersection in the central business district, the Williamsport Post Office has, since its erection, been a city landmark. Occupying an entire city block, the post office, with its tower rising majestically 6 stories above richly textured facades, is a critical element of the streetscape of one of the city's principal thoroughfares, West 4th Street. The proportions, massing, fenestration, and detailing of the building combine to create a sense of monumentality and quality of design, which rank the structure among the most notable governmental buildings of its era. Construction of the post office was begun in 1888 to the designs of William A. Ferret, supervising architect of the Treasury. Upon its completion in 1891, the building was hailed as an imposing, elegant stone structure, and residents took pride in the fact that construction costs had fallen short of the amount appropriated, which, by the way, the total amount was $225,000. The building today is notably well maintained and little altered. Additions to the rear of the structure have been carefully planned to respect the older portion's integrity and high quality construction. Today, 80 years after its completion, the Williamsport Post Office is an irreplaceable architectural resource to the city because of its design, urbanist qualities, and fine construction. So the final cost of the post office, when it was completed in 1891, was $208,430. And again, that was under the appropriated $225,000. So I'll now try to get back out of this.
Bruce, if you're done presenting, I can, there we go.
Yeah, I should be back now.
Bruce, thank you very much for that. That was informative and greatly appreciated. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Bruce, either members of the committee or others that are attending the meeting? I take it as no, and Liz seems to have popped off here. I would just say this, you know, I know over the past couple of meetings that we've talked about, and Councilwoman Mealy specifically has brought up this point, which has a lot of merit. You know, the And here she is. So hang on for a second. Lizzie there? Lizzie, are you there?
It's finally. Sorry. There's something going on with my phone, and I keep having other phone calls buzz through, and it's disrupting this chat. So.
No worries. Bruce wrapped up, and I just asked if anybody had any questions or comments. So if you do, by all means, chime in, Liz.
Sure. I just wanted to thank Bruce for the history. The building is a fascinating building, and the reasons why the city wound up there are interesting as well. I would, as I've said in the past in this meeting and in other meetings, and you have to excuse the traffic noise, I'm outside here. As I've said in the past at this meeting and other meetings, Williamsport is a town based history, very mindful of its history. And I think that is an important factor that we need to consider as we're discussing what our plans are for renovation or moving forward. That we have always sort of relied on our history as one of our defining factors, and I think that we need to consider that element of City Hall and its value to the city as a whole. But thanks, Bruce, for bringing that up.
Sure.
Yeah, and I had a note here that Bruce, as you were going through your presentation, that I had made history, heritage, and meaning. I think that's what really struck me when it came to your presentation and City Hall in general. There's a lot of history there. There's a lot of heritage for our city and for our region that was invested into that building, and there's a lot of meaning for the area, and it's really hard to put a value on that. So as much as I'm a big believer in letting the numbers lead us in any decision that we make, I would agree with Councilwoman Mealy's points that this is something that we should keep in the back of our minds as we are working to make the most prudent decision. So Bruce, I would again thank you very much. I really enjoyed it, and I thought that was very, very valuable and insightful for us. So
thanks, you're welcome. If I could just maybe add one more thing. There were so many things obviously that I couldn't fit in here, but I know that at the time that Mayor Kirby was proposing to take over and buy that building and invest in it, he was quoted in one article as saying, please, I repeat, please maintain this building and don't let what happened to the previous City Hall happen to this building. And I thought that was kind of interesting that he said that. And of course, now when you look at Old City Hall on Pine Street, it's been turned into a wonderful building again. And it just seems, I don't know, I don't want to say it's a Williamsport thing to let their city halls go, but it seems that that's kind of is what has happened, and I'll just leave it at that.
no, I would appreciate that. And as we look at all of our options, that's very much something that we need to consider is what's the long-term operational cost of any option, as well as how do we maintain it, because we don't want I guess in this case, hoping third time's a charm to make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes again. So point well taken. Thank you very much, Bruce. I appreciate it very much. All right. We'll continue working through the agenda. Item 2, updates on renovation of City Hall. The one big thing from last meeting that I had noted was, working through validating some of the HVAC stuff. I've made a lot of progress on that on my end. I'm at the point where I need to do more of a deep dive in City Hall to just validate some of that. And due to some personal circumstances, I was not able to do that in the past month here. So I would like to do that over the next couple of weeks. I'm hoping to have this wrapped up for our next meeting in September. Initially, I want to say that the numbers out there are a little heavy. But I think there's some factors that need to be addressed to understand to what degree. So making progress, still more to be done though. So any questions or thoughts or what have you on that item from anybody? Okay, moving on. Item 3, I'm going to lump items 3 and 4 together, the other options. So from our last meeting, there were a couple of things that we were going to push forward on. One was, I think, kind of honing in on the space utilization component. Joe Pavlak, I think you might have been working with John Sander on that. I could be wrong.
I think it was Joe Girardi and John.
Joe Girardi. I mixed my Joes up. We've got Adams, we have Johns, we have Joes.
Correct.
Joe, how are you, sir?
Good. Yourself?
Doing good. How are you making out with kind of honing in on some of those common areas and what have you?
If you're speaking of Trade and Transit 1, Trade and Transit 2, the areas that, you know, for us to be in that building. Vince was more
validating the amount of space that we actually need before honing in on how it would look at a different site.
Yeah, John actually has those numbers. I don't have them in front of me. We did. I think the original numbers that I have, give me a minute.
Yeah,
City Hall right now, if I split the police department and everybody else. Police department, right now, presently, they have about 10,310 square feet. And the other departments have 9,569 square feet. Yeah. Okay, John and I went through and looked at what we had and talked to each of the department heads and actually asked them what they really needed. Like the mayor's office, you can agree, Mayor, you have probably 3 or 4 times the amount of space you really need up there. I know I do down in my room and so forth. So we cut it down and we went through and looked at it, and it's probably about 7,000 square feet we would need as a department, okay, and still have room to grow. So that's what we did there. So that's the breakdown of what we actually have at City Hall.
Okay. The notes that I have from the last meeting, I thank you for reiterating that. I think some of the more granularity details that we had talked about the last time was, you know, can we start to look at, are we adequately capturing storage needs, common areas, that kind of stuff. I think there was some of those more details that we were going to start to hone in on, as well as, you know, well, we talked about the optimizing space, but that would happen depending on which direction we go and what have you. So,
now, to add to that, John and I did go over to Train Transit 1. Now, that space is available, and I don't know what kind of lease arrangements there are, Mayor, what kind of agreements we have and so forth. But that space over there would definitely fit our needs as a department other than the police department. And we would have room to expand, grow, and storage. If we own the building, if we could move there. Okay, we did look at that. With very minor work done. I mean, I realize you're going to have to rearrange some walls and so forth, but not a lot of that would need to be done. And our accessibility problem would be solved in that building.
Speaking on Trade and Transit 1, I guess that was another, in the group that we've lumped together, I think Councilwoman Mealy and I discussed that we would get together and take a tour. I hadn't been in the building in some time, and I wasn't sure what the last time that Ms. Mealy was. But we did on Monday go through that building, and I think that without knowing what spaces are tied up at this point and how long that they're tied up for, outside of the theater league on the first floor,
right.
We felt that if the space was all available, that it would suit us. Definitely, as Joe Girardi is saying, some design changes to the facility, but it's something that I think that Councilwoman Mealy and I feel that we need to determine what spaces are available to see whether it's something that we would have the space that we think we have.
Right. Now, like I said, when John and I went through, most of the space or a lot of it was not being used by anybody that we saw. Joe, I know there were some individuals there and so forth, but
There's a larger section on the 3rd floor that we had some confusion on, so we're trying to get some details on that.
right.
So that was our question mark at this point. The space seemed to be being utilized at this time, and we just don't know what future commitments are out there, and want to inquire about that to see whether the space in total in the building would fulfill our needs and, you know, have room for those common spaces and the spaces that were initially put together from the previous proposal. We still are stuck on the fact of whether we should own the building or whether we should lease the building. And one of the things that we were, I think, going to bring up today or wanted to bring up today was to determine what type of, what the market value is for rent out there for commercial spaces. We're going to need to figure out at some point to see if we were to rent it from the entity or from the city itself. But if we had to put a fair value on some rental value, what would that be? And again, exploring whether we'd be able to, I guess, purchase the facility and what steps would need to go through there. But I think we want to see, to start off before digging in and getting much more detail there, we need to find out what our commitments are to current users and make sure that we're not imposing or taking away what's already been given to them.
Right. Yeah, I think Joe's pretty well summed it up. The space is certainly potentially suitable with some heavy rehab for the city's purposes, but we do have other commitments in that space currently, and we need to suss out what happens to those other commitments. You know, and I think we need to look at. Granted, we would be effectively renting the building from ourselves if we were renting, but we need to look at what we're currently spending annually, what a market rate rent would be, or what would seem to be a rent that we could establish, and whether or not that fits in our budget. And then also the potential for acquisition. And we do know we've received pretty clear word that that the transit obligations of the structure are still being met, and that we could occupy the building without affecting those. But I do think that at some point in the future, if this looks like an option, we are really seriously considering we should look a little harder into the funding for the building and our ongoing obligations with that funding, and just make certain that we have everything really nailed down there so there aren't any surprises. Does that sound about right, Joe?
Yes.
Okay.
I would think with the current, correct me if I'm wrong, I would think that just if we're trying to understand our commitments to our current users and identify what's taken up, what's left, I would think we would be able to identify that through River Valley Transit. I know it's not the city, but
we don't doubt that. We just met yesterday to take and go through the building, and we saw, you know, some of the spaces that we weren't sure were being utilized that are being utilized now. So we just need to gather that information, and it just getting into the building was not right away. Didn't happen right away. Just
Gotcha.
Didn't have time to inquire, I guess, at this point.
So I think we'll be sussing that out and reaching out to any parties that might be involved over the course of the next month. Yeah, Joe?
I'm sorry.
I think that was kind of our hope.
Was that we could reach out to get the agreements and to reach out to current users to, you know, establish everyone's needs or expectations?
I think yes.
My line of communication froze up there for a second. Did I miss something?
Yeah, I didn't hear what you had said.
Oh, I had said that I think over the course of the next month, we'll be attempting to kind of suss out what commitments we have in place in Trade and Transit 1 And then to what extent those commitments are ongoing or, maybe expiring. And we can come back and report on that hopefully next month or 2 months out, depending on how complex it is.
Okay. Yeah, I would agree with all of that, as logical next steps on that option specifically. The other thing floating out there that we discussed last month that directly impacts train transit 1 or 2 or any other non-city owned option is the public safety building. I know, Chief, we had talked about that last time, and if we go into one of those other other buildings, we still need to find a place for our police force. I think we're supposed to either have a meeting with the county and UPMC either around this time or right before the meeting. Is there any update as far as, I guess, the level of commitment, or is there any initial level of commitment from those other parties? Because we would need them backing that idea as well for it to be successful.
Yes, there is. We're going to have a meeting to reconfirm that because it's been some time
Okay.
with COVID that we haven't met. It took some time to get an MOU drafted, which we have. It's going to have to come before council and the commissioners and before the hospital board and get approved by all three before we can go from being an ad hoc to an official committee that can raise money. Right now, we have commitment going all the way back to October from those groups, and I don't have any reason to believe that that's changed.
So you're having a meeting before our next meeting, which is, I will verify that here. Just give me a second. Second week of September. So you guys are getting together before the second week of September.
Yes, my plan is sometime at the end of next week. Things have been, as you know, quite busy recently. So, but I believe we can get together before the end of next week.
Okay. All right. So we'll have that reconfirmed one way or the other for the next meeting.
Yes, sir. And before your next meeting in September, you will all have a copy of the Homeland Security review of this building as well. I definitely encourage you to dig into that when I get it to you. There's some assessments of structural issues. As you might notice, this building is like no other government building you've probably ever seen from the inside. And there are issues with regard to security. You can get immediate access to the mayor, most parts of the police department by kicking in one door. And so there are huge security concerns here that if we were to do a permanent change but stay here, we would have to figure out. A new building obviously would allow for a new design. And any other place we move to is going to require renovations. But yeah, the Homeland Security assessment is something you should take a look at.
Yeah. If you shoot it out, I would love to take a look at it. Okay. Regarding updates on items 3 and 4, is there anything else floating out there? Those were the big things that we had discussed last meeting. It sounds like with Trade and Transit 1 or 2, we're progressing nicely. It sounds like we'll have a lot more clarity for our next meeting with the public safety building, which I think is realistically the biggest hurdle right now in my mind. Is there anything else from anybody else on those? Joe, you're muted if there is something.
No, like I said, I think once Joe and Miss Millie get that information around, and we'll have a better determination on what we can fit in that building without the police department.
No, and
that's,
we're not disputing. I was trying to say something, but was muted, Joe, so.
Sometimes
the
it's good
two
to be
Joes. But no, I would say that the mayor, I guess, had sent some properties out that he had received notice on. So maybe we want to have the group working on 4.
Yes, that was
check into those 2 options.
Given to Mr. Palizzi and myself, and I believe Mr. Palizzi is not here, but he's working on making contact, Mayor, so we can take a look at those buildings, see what they have, and what kind of monetary is going on. So yes, but we were aware of that, Joe. So we'll have that by next meeting also.
So item number 5, in relation to our options, everything that we have talked about as far as what we're working on to achieve for the next meeting, is there anything else needed aside from just sweat equity from us? Any resources needed by anybody? Assuming no. So just to sum up, public safety building, Chief Hagan, that's happening next week, so we'll be good there for the next meeting. Commitment levels, market value, rent, et cetera, for trade and transit 1 or 2. I'm working through the HVAC side, specifically with City Hall to shore up costs. Those are the big things. Did I miss any kind of big deliverables for the next meeting that anybody else discussed? I don't think so.
One question,
Yep.
I may have missed it, the roof. Has that been a matter of discussion for you yet?
Yeah, so at our last meeting, when we talked about City Hall, from John Sanders' point of view, that cost was relatively accurate from a former study with Reynolds. So that's what we're going with. That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
Yep, you're welcome.
And if I'm correct, Mr. Yoder, that covers the slate roof and also the rubber roofs.
That's
Correct.
correct.
Yep.
That is correct. Yep. Okay. Any related items from committee members or anybody on the meeting? Okay. 8 minutes left. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Yoder, before you do that,
Yeah.
I'm going to send out the Homeland Security report. I'm only sending it to the city email addresses. So if any members of council who can't get city email need a copy, let me know and we'll get them a hard copy.
That sounds good.
Because it's obviously confidential and
Yep,
can't be shared.
understood. Understood.
Thank you.
All right. Nothing else for the good of the order. I will take a motion to adjourn. Liz, you're the only formal voting member on here, so I'll need that from
So
you.
moved.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone. And Bruce, if you're out there still, thank you again very much for your presentation. Greatly appreciated.
See you guys.
See you, everyone.
Yeah.